Nina Simone, the High Priestess of Soul. The civil rights movement saw a rise to some of the nation's most influential figures. However, not all are remembered for the hard work they put into the movement, one of these figures being Nina Simone, who compromised her musical career to support one of the most influential movements in American history. Simone quickly became one of the most outspoken members of the movement, but as the gaining of rights plateaued, she abandoned the movement like many people during the time period. Nina Simone rose to prominence in the late 60s, in which white people openly oppressed African Americans under a system that permitted and encouraged this behavior. States' customs and laws made unequal treatment of African Americans lawful. Jim Crow laws were in place to segregate black Americans from white Americans in restrooms, water fountains, and schools, and enabled the race-based discrimination of bus seating, as well as denied the right to vote for black Americans. These laws evolved after the Supreme Court case of Plessy v. Ferguson. This case coined the term separate but equal, a concept that states that it is okay for African American communities to be segregated from the white communities as long as they are being treated equally. This was just a mask for the true racist motives behind these laws. On all accounts, African Americans were given vastly inferior resources by the government. This racist legislation was driven in part by the reignition of the Ku Klux Klan, a group of white supremacists who held a large amount of political sway. The Klan was founded in 1866 as a vehicle for resistance to post-Civil War Reformation. The KKK was made up entirely of white Anglo-Saxon Protestants and was especially known for lynching black citizens. Police either felt unable to stop the Klan or actively helped them lynch people. Either way, KKK members were rarely ever brought to trial, and if they were, they could be almost certain that they would get away free due to the racist court system. The civil rights movement was a response to all this injustice. Black and white liberal reformers spoke out for equality and formed groups such as the NAACP and the National Urban League to retaliate against the oppression of racism. One example of these protests was in December of 1955, when E.D. Nixon and Rosa Parks, both NAACP members, started a boycott of buses and white-owned businesses in Montgomery, Alabama. This movement also saw the rise of one of our country's most influential figures, Martin Luther King Jr., who also inspired many others to fight against racial injustice. In 1963, he organized protests in Birmingham, Alabama. These protests were covered by various national news stations and highlighted police brutality. Images of tear gas and armed police on horseback beating protesters spread like wildfire across the country news channels. The outrage in response to the police treatment of these protesters ignited a wave of new support for the movement. Motivational speeches by Martin Luther King Jr. and others spurred on the newcomers and veterans of the movement. In one of his speeches, MLK is quoted as saying, "We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor, it must be demanded by the oppressed." This shows that their voices need to be heard by others in order to obtain any kind of freedom, and demonstrates the inspirational power of Martin Luther King Jr. Nina Simone was also a prominent voice of the civil rights movement. However, unlike traditional means of activism, her participation for social justice was expressed through music. Music gave her the ability to express impatience and frustration in a more direct way than mere speech would allow. By the mid-1960s, she toured around the country, risking her own life to bring inspirational music to different hotspots for anti-racism. Nina's song Mississippi Goddamn was written in 1963 as a response to a bombing in a Birmingham church where 4 young black girls had been killed. The live recording captures Nina's frustration and anger with the system and demonstrates her brutal honesty when it comes to talking about racism. Simone boldly and loudly talks about the injustice inherent in America and is upfront about her vulnerability through her music. Some of the more outspoken lyrics in the Mississippi Goddamn say, "But this country is full of lies. You're all gonna die and die like flies." The courage it took to sing this to an audience with a majority white audience paid off, as this marked a turning point for her among white listeners. Mississippi Goddamn didn't just mark the turning of her success, it also marked her growing frustration with America and demonstrated her incredible ability to speak her mind regardless of circumstance. She continued to be outspoken about her beliefs, such as in an article by Claudia Roth-Pierpoint. After taking on a more traditionally African appearance, Simone expresses, I can't be white, and I'm the kind of colored girl who looks like everything white people despise or have been taught to despise. Her appearance and skin color caused discrimination against her. However, she remained prevalent as she continued to stand up for her rights. Simone is unique in this regard because of how brutally honest and outraged she was against racism. As her influence became broader, she was crowned as the High Priestess of Soul due to her ability to mix music with a knack for unabashedly speaking the truth. Unfortunately, the civil rights movement started to lose traction as leading figures became subject to the oppression of society. First, Malcolm X was assassinated in 1965, then Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968, which caused Simone to be more hesitant in her role as an activist. As the movement lost some of its most prominent leaders, Nina Simone started to lose hope in the American dream, stating, "By the time the 60s ended, I look in the mirror and see two faces, knowing that on the one hand I love being black and being a woman, and on the other it was my color and sex which had fucked me up in the first place." Simone gave up on the ideals of America because she could only see the hypocrisy inherent in the system she labored under, and believed that this movement was no longer as strong as it once was. She described America as a cancer in which she wanted no part of. This frustration was a common sentiment at the time, as there were many parallels to the majority of people within the movement.
Pain, humiliation, and death he did not dread. Yes, with his Bible by his side, from his foes he would not hide. It's hard to think that this great man is dead.
Nina Simone has had a huge influence on our society today in her music alone. She musically influenced artists like Sam Smith, Alicia Keys, Aretha Franklin, and John Lennon, who similarly used their platform to speak out against the injustice of society. Simone was a highly influential musician and activist, but despite her best efforts, she couldn't fix racism in this country. She grew increasingly frustrated with how America still indulged in the illusion of the American dream. Examples of modern-day racism include the fact that African Americans are incarcerated at 5 times the rate of white Americans, the police are 3 times as likely to stop a person of color as they are white drivers, and the fact that African Americans are 4 times as likely to lose their right to vote due to felony disenfranchisement than white people. Donald Trump was elected using a racist rhetoric, and just a couple weeks ago called African countries shitholes. Of course, these are just a couple of examples of documented racism in society. Although Simone was not recognized at her time, her efforts both musically and as an activist have acclaimed her a place. She was accepted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and numerous modern-day documentaries such as What Happened to Simone are being made about her life. Nina Simone was not only a model for the arc of the civil rights movement, but also a powerful liberating musician who had an enormous influence on our country that will be felt now and for generations to come.